Welcome everyone to our March Kraw lecture. I'm George Kraw, and we're beginning the 6th year of this series, which features acclaimed UC Santa Cruz scientists and technologists who are grappling with some of the biggest questions of our time. Tonight, Professor Anne Kapuscinski joins us for a conversation about the new Coastal Science and Policy Graduate Program. This innovative program has attracted a highly diverse student body of early career leaders, and a few will join Anne to share their stories. Moderating tonight's discussion is Don Kroll, a professor in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of California, Santa Cruz. He received a bachelor's degree in biology from UC Davis, a master's degree in marine sciences from Moss Landing Marine Labs, and a PhD in marine sciences from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Before we begin, I would like to share a few details about tonight's event. We are using a webinar tool, so there is no chat function. We will have an opportunity to answer your questions at the end of the program, and we invite you to submit your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Tonight's event will be recorded and available on YouTube at a later time. Now I'll turn this over to Don.
Thanks, George, and thanks everyone for coming. It's really my pleasure to introduce my colleague, friend, and partner in crime, Dr. Anne Kapuscinski. So first, I just want to get the amazing titles and awards out of the way, and I'm just going to name a few. So Anne is a professor in the Environmental Studies Department here at UC Santa Cruz, and she's also the director of the Coastal Science and Policy Graduate Program that George just mentioned. Anne is also the chair of the board of the Union of Concerned Scientists. She's a member of the Ocean Protection Council's Science Advisory Team, and she has served as a scientific advisor for the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, World Health Organization, Global Environmental Facility, European Union Food Safety Agency, and U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Okay, so she's also been awarded the 2019 Ocean Award in Innovation, and she's also a Pew Fellow in Marine Conservation. So let's just say she's kind of busy. So what the heck has Anne been doing to get all those accolades? Well, Anne is a global leader in developing new and sustainable approaches to aquaculture. Many of you know that while promising is a way to feed our world, there are some problems with it. One of the big problems is what you feed the fish. And Anne and her team have been innovating and devising new approaches to how we might sustainably produce fish protein, basically by figuring out how we can produce new feeds that don't require us to catch small fish offshore or grow intensive crops on land. And she's going to tell you a bit about this tonight. I came to know Anne around our search to find the perfect director for a new program in coastal science and policy here at UC Santa Cruz. We had the program approved, and we just needed the right person to run it. And as we cast our net wide, we kept hearing about Anne, her work, and her passion for sustainability and education. So we took a chance and asked her if she might be interested. Now, imagine this, kind of paint this picture for yourself. At the time, Anne was sitting comfortably in an idyllic setting at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire as a distinguished professor of sustainability science with an amazing lab in a century-old converted barn, watching cows grazing outside her window, the whole 9 yards. She wasn't even thinking about Santa Cruz or surfing, but we managed to convince her to come out and take a look, and we were amazed when she agreed to take on the lead role as the inaugural director of our Coastal Science and Policy Program. I think taking this kind of chance speaks to Anne's passion for training new leadership in sustainability. And let me tell you, it's not often that a public university is able to steal a faculty member away from a top-notch Ivy League college. So either she's crazy or prescient, and I think she's still trying to figure that out. But regardless, we're amazingly lucky to have her here, and it's been a real pleasure working, teaching, and scheming with Anne around the program. So Anne is here tonight to share with you a bit about her cutting-edge research, as well as tell you about our new program in coastal science and policy. So please welcome Dr. Anne Kapuscinski.
Thanks so much, Don. That was a really kind introduction. And before I launch into my comments, I should though mention that part of what convinced me to take this risk that seems somewhat crazy, but also really exciting, was the amazing creativity, vision, and passion of Don and a number of other faculty members who came up with the idea to create this coastal science and policy program and founded it. I just fell immediately in love when I first read the program description, and then when I came here to interview and met them. So here we are. So let me share my screen and get started here. Everyone's seeing my screen, right? Okay. As Don mentioned, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my lab's research, as well as about the Coastal Science and Policy Program. And after I speak, I will then introduce 3 of our students who will share their stories with you, and then we'll have some question and answers afterwards. This slide points out that there are a number of huge problems that are facing coasts and oceans. We know that human survival depends on coasts and oceans being healthy, and yet we're faced with these complex, wicked problems. And in fact, these problems motivate both the approach of my research lab and of the Coastal Science and Policy Program. These problems give us a sense of urgency, but they also provide an exciting opportunity to focus both research and training of rising early career leaders on designing, innovating, and implementing feasible and scalable solutions to these kinds of problems. I'm going to briefly introduce my research team. I don't have the time to name everybody, but you can read about our members on our lab website. I do want to introduce, though, next to my photograph, the gentleman in the white lab coat, Dr. Pallab Sarkar, who is my partner in crime. He is the co-leader of the lab with me, and I convinced UC Santa Cruz to move him, as well as our lab manager, Devin Fitzgerald, the dashing young person with the sunglasses, to Santa Cruz from Dartmouth, so that we could continue the groundbreaking research that we were doing. And Dr. Sarkar is an internationally accomplished sustainable fish nutrition researcher, and is currently also teaching a new course here at UC Santa Cruz on sustainable aquaculture. As Don mentioned to you, we are focused right now in our lab on one key issue for making aquaculture more sustainable, and that is to figure out how to decouple aquaculture feeds from dependency on wild ocean fish. This is a graph from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and it's showing the current trends for capture fisheries and aquaculture. In a nutshell, aquaculture is the world's fastest growing food sector, as indicated by the blue parts of this graph. And today it produces about half of the world's seafood consumed by people. Fishing catches, which are depicted by the orange and the red, have plateaued, however, and everyone's expecting aquaculture to fill the gap between fishing catches and growing demand. But aquaculture is overly depending on catching small marine fish such as sardines, mackerel, and anchovies to make fish meal and fish oil used in aquafeeds. In fact, about 11% of all the world's catches right now are ground up into fish meal and fish oil. It's clear that we must decouple aquaculture from ocean catches in order for it to really be a sustainable solution and to actually add net fish to the world food supply. Just to give you a feel for what's going on with these forage fisheries, or these fisheries for these small marine fish that are being ground up into fish meal and fish oil, the picture on the left gives you a sense of the scale of these industrial fisheries, showing one picture of a Chilean purse seiner harvesting 400 tons of jack mackerel. The problem with these industrial fisheries, in a nutshell, is that they are diverting these fish away from ocean food webs, where feeding larger fish and also seabirds and other marine organisms. And now, however, they're also threatening small-scale fishing, because some of these industrial fishing fleets have moved to places like off the west coast of Africa. The pictures here on the right are photos taken in Liberia by one of our current coastal science and policy students, Tom Collison, who is studying another fishery that is interacting with a centuries-long tradition of fishing for a small Sardinella species there, which is really important to the food security of the local communities, to their economic vitality, and to their cultural identity. And catches have been declining in this area, suspected partly due to large foreign fishing fleets that are fishing offshore, both off the coast of Liberia and in countries along the border of Liberia. So clearly we have to solve this problem, both for ecological sustainability and social sustainability. So our lab decided to ask the question, can we turn to ecology to identify a possible solution? And we turned to the knowledge that microalgae are at the base of marine food webs, and they move through biomagnification up through the food web, eventually into the flesh of desired fish to eat, like tuna and salmon. In fact, microalgae are the planet's main producer of energy-rich and health-promoting omega-3 fatty acids. So we had a hunch, based on some of the literature that was work done before we got started on this, that we potentially could get to a fish-free feed, a feed that has no fish meal or fish oil in it, by combining marine microalgae. And we set out doing a number of preliminary studies. I'm going to tell you about our most significant recent experiment. It was actually took several years to do this experiment, but most significantly recent published results from this experiment, where we combined 2 types of marine microalgae. The first one, which I'm showing on the upper part of the slide, is Cyzochytrin. Just think of the letter S, replacing 100% of the fish oil in the experimental diets that we developed for our experiment. These were diets where we were trying to remove as much of the fish ingredients as possible. So in all 3 experimental diets, we got rid of the fish oil. And then we attempted to get rid of as much of the fish meal as possible using another marine microalgae called Nanochoropsis. Think of it as the letter N. And we had 3 different types of diets, one that replaced 33% of the fish meal, one replacing 66%, and one replacing 100% of the fish meal. And to make this more affordable to do, we took another lesson from nature. In nature, there really is no waste. Waste is actually a resource out of place. And we hooked up with a company called Qualitas Health, which already produces commercially this Nanochoropsis algae. They extract from it the omega-3 rich oil to sell as algae oil pills for human supplements. And they're left over with this biomass waste that they were having to pay to dispose of or had really no economic use for. But it's rich in protein, still has some energy and a little bit of oil in it. And so that's what we used in our diets. I'm now going to get to the punchline. In November, we published a major paper reporting an amazing breakthrough. We were even impressed by our results, which is that we found that the fish-free feed performed better than the conventional feed that has fish meal and fish oil in it, and then the other feeds that only had replaced a portion of the fish meal. We found that we got better fish weight gains and growth traits, and also higher nutritional value in farmed fish. And we did all these experiments with a globally important aquaculture species, tilapia. This work has gotten a lot of attention in the popular media, and we're also getting inquiries from people around the world who are interested in collaborating with us or clamoring already to take this work to commercial scale. I'm only going to show you this one slide of some data just to drive home 2 points. One is looking at the slide on the left, which is showing that our fish-free feed also had the best economic performance. And as you probably know, farmers, aquaculture farmers, feed mills, and really everybody on the business end of aquaculture cares the most about economic performance. And what we found was that our fish-free feed was the most economical, the least expensive, if you looked at it in terms of the cost per unit of weight gain of the tilapia. Looking at the graph on the right, consumers care the most about their food being healthy. And the pink arrow is pointing to the bar that shows that our fish-free feed improved the health benefit of the fillet of tilapia by depositing the highest amounts of one of the omega-3 fatty acids. Now, we're aware that there's a lot of other experimentation going on to develop other kinds of alternative ingredients to get rid of fish meal and fish oil in diets. There's exciting work going on with insect meal, soldier flies, single-cell proteins, single-cell organisms such as bacteria and yeast, as well as algae. It's a bit of a wild west out there in that there is no common way to impartially compare what are the economic and environmental impacts of using these different alternative ingredients. So we pursued, led by one of our postdocs, Brandy McEwen, a NOAA grant that was awarded, and we are developing an open source decision support tool that will allow comparing the economic and environmental sustainability implications on a common platform. This slide just briefly gives you a sense for the design of the tool. We have a whole cadre of undergrads. You saw a number of their faces in the slide that I showed of our lab, who are working with us, and especially with Brandy, to develop this tool, and it will be completely open source. Additionally, we now want to extend our work to other commercially important aquaculture species, and we're using trout as a model for also salmon. Trout farming is partly important here in California, and as many of you probably know, salmon farming is a big deal around the world. Just today, by amazing coincidence, we received our first shipment of small baby rainbow trout. These pictures literally were taken this morning, and they were being stocked into our tanks at this wonderful aquaculture greenhouse that UCSC has built for us, along with some support from one donor. And we're getting ready to now launch experiments to see if we can achieve fish-free feeds for rainbow trout. And finally, some of the younger members of our team were excited about how do we take this work to commercial scale and recognize that there often can be too big a gap between the research results and the actual uptake by the commercial sector. So led by our PhD student, Ashley Bay, as CEO, we have founded a startup, Verdant Seeds, that's beginning to work on filling that gap. I'd like now to switch to talking about the Coastal Science and Policy Program, which takes a similar solutions-driven approach to its approach to training our students. And these pictures show our students from the first 3 cohorts. I'm going to say a lot more about them here in a moment. In this slide, I'm trying to show you that we take a very intentional approach in the design of our program to recruit emerging early career leaders from around the world. Through our networks, we do scour the world to find the young people who already have vision and passion, and in many cases are already working on the issue that they care to solve and have some ideas for how to approach it. The program is primarily a master's degree program. We also do have a PhD designated emphasis, which is sort of like a PhD minor, but I'm going to focus mostly here today on the master's degree program. It's a 2-year program. In year 1, the students take interdisciplinary courses, and there's a common theme for everything they're doing in their courses and many workshops, which is that we're aiming very deliberately to build their leadership and solution skills. In year 2, they spend the entire year off campus pursuing a capstone project, which is essentially pursuing and developing a solution path to a pressing problem with a partner organization that they have chosen, and they co-design the project with the partner organization. And then we do not forget about our students after they graduate. We do a lot of work with them before they graduate to increase chances that after they graduate, they immediately get onto the career path they care about. And our goal is to maintain a close network and a growing network with our alums. And the arrows below here are also showing that we on purpose keep the program relatively small so that we can do intensive and individualized monitoring. We've been developing and we continue to strengthen a very inclusive community, as you can see from our pictures, and I'll say more about that in a moment. This map attempts to give you a sense of the global reach of the program already as we're partway through our 3rd year. The yellow circles and the numbers indicate students, numbers of them from the home countries that they're from. In most cases, they're spending their 2nd year doing their capstone project in their home country, but there are a few exceptions as indicated by the blue arrows, which are the blue circles, which are places where a student coming from another country is pursuing a capstone project in a different country. As far as we know, there's no other graduate program at UC Santa Cruz with this kind of global reach. And there may also be no such other program of this sort in the entire UC system. And this is one of the most exciting aspects of the program, both for us and the students. To give you a sense of the kinds of partners our students have already connected with, they've been very enterprising on their own, as well as with help from our faculty and their connections, to identify and work closely with a huge diversity of partners. This slide lists the partners that have been either involved with students to date, including those who graduated and are starting to be involved with our current cohort who are partway through their 1st year. They represent NGOs, both large and small NGOs, groups in the private sector, including some startups such as Blue Ocean Barns and Healthy Fire. They also include a number of foundations. One example being somewhere on here is the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. And of course, also a number of NGOs such as Conservation International, Nature Conservancy, and some government agencies. When our students are in the field for their capstone year, they are actively involved in field work in an amazing variety of environmental settings and working on a huge range of diverse issues, and always working closely with a diversity of stakeholders who are relevant to the issue they're working on, especially if they want to apply science to addressing a novel policy solution or a novel technological solution to the problem. I don't have the time to tell you the rich diversity of the things they do. You're going to hear from a few of our students in a moment, but hopefully these pictures give you a sense of the excitement and the diversity of approaches. I do want to mention, though, that one of the things that has happened fortuitously is we've experienced some really cool international synergies. For example, one of our students in the class of 2021, Abel Muplama, shown in the lower right of this slide, is from Malawi. And when he joined the program, and we had recruited him, in fact, because of his vision that he had an idea for how to stop the intensive deforestation happening in this country, happening also in many coastal locations, being driven primarily by the need for fuel, firewood and charcoal for fuel by resource poor people. And he had an inkling of an idea of an innovation to solve this problem. But it wasn't until he came into our program and through connections of our faculty, he learned about a like-minded startup that was further ahead than he was, based in Ethiopia, developing homegrown designs and actually building the first truly commercial scale manufacturing facility in Ethiopia to build stoves, and also taking a circular economy approach to using local waste to develop fuel pellets. He is now doing his capstone project with them, and they are in fact planning now to expand the work to Malawi. So this kind of synergy would not have been possible if Abel had stayed in Africa, in Malawi. This kind of innovative and sort of bold and slightly disruptive approach to graduate education is really only possible through generous support from a range of donors. And I've listed our donors here. In the interest of time, I won't mention all their names, but we are immensely grateful to them, because we would not be able to bring together students from around the world without having to worry about financial aid needs, and be able to guide them in this intensive way so that they can carry out these amazing capstone projects and then quickly pivot to being effective in the workforce. What I want to do now is introduce our 3 student speakers who are going to follow me. And I've put below their pictures just one of many facts that I could have shared that gives you a feel for why we recruited them into the program. So first person who will speak is Kalina Brown. She's in her first year of the program. She will be in the class of 2022. And we partly picked her because she had already won a very prestigious post-baccalaureate Ray Fellowship and spent time at the Ocean Conservancy before coming to grad school. Next after her, you're going to hear from Rafid Shidki. I forgot to mention that Kalina is from St. Vincent. Rafid is from Indonesia. Rafid is in his 2nd year. He's off in Indonesia right now, conducting his capstone project. And one of the reasons that we selected him was that he had co-founded the Thresher Shark Project Indonesia, and he's going to tell you a lot about that during his talk. And then Casey Zwei is in our first group of alums. She graduated in June 2020. And we were really excited about her because of her reputation for having crafted model single-use plastic policies. And she's really a circular economy pioneer. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and invite Kalina to share her slides and to talk. And then after Kalina, we'll go on to the next people.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Kalina Brown, and as Anne mentioned, I'm a first-year master's student in the Coastal Science and Policy program. And my journey to the CSP program began back in the summer of 2019 when I was a Ray Fellow at Ocean Conservancy. And the Ray Fellowship provides many opportunities for recent graduates from underrepresented groups to work with different organizations in the conservation and energy sectors. And as a Ray Fellow, I was a part of an amazing community that was committed to promoting justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within the environmental field, and a staff that supported us through mentorships, workshops, community check-ins. And further, as a part of Ocean Conservancy's climate team, my work centered around looking at how a changing climate is affecting our ocean, and in turn, the people who rely on the ocean for their livelihood, culture and traditions, and food security. And during my time at Ocean Conservancy, I was able to participate at the state level here in California and on a broader international scale. One exciting opportunity was in December 2019, I was able to take part in the United Nations 25th Climate Change Conference through funding provided by the Ray Fellowship and Ocean Conservancy. And at the conference, I had the opportunity to participate in 2 events where I engaged with scientists, NGO practitioners, and community leaders. And it was one of the many occasions I had during my fellowship to grow my leadership skills. These elements that make up the Ray Fellowship program were also what drew me to the CSP program and motivated me to apply. So like I said, similar to the Ray Fellowship, CSP promotes community among its students. And though we are virtual at the moment, we still find ways to connect. I was also very interested in the program because I already had a science background, but I wanted to fill that policy gap, and the curriculum, along with the practical second year capstone, seemed like an innovative way for me to learn, gain hands-on experience while contributing meaningfully to an organization's goals. Further, a major selling point for me was that the Coastal Science and Policy Program was committed to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the funding they provided, which is often a barrier to participation at the master's level. And the fact that I'm here presenting to you today is a testament to the program's commitment to building us as the next leaders. It is for all these reasons and more that this was the only program I applied to. And when I applied back in December 2019, I could not perceive how relevant my interest area would be today. So during my time as a Ray Fellow at Ocean Conservancy, I became acutely aware of my otherness. When you're the youngest person in the room or the only woman of color, you definitely feel it. But this caused me to start thinking about, why is this the case? And that's the challenge I want to address in my capstone: how to integrate justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in conservation nonprofits. Well, the environmental movement has historically lacked diversity, particularly in regards to race, and the lack of representation of diverse voices has several disadvantages, such as a lack of understanding of the communities they are trying to help, and in some cases, doing more harm than good. Organizations are also missing out on stellar candidates because these individuals do not feel welcome in such an organization. And the organization is also limiting their ways of thinking, problem solving, and innovation due to a lack of diverse experiences. Also, these organizations do not reflect the changing demographic landscape of the US. And this challenge is ever so clear at the leadership levels. Studies have shown that greatest benefits of diversity occur when people of color represent at least 25% of senior leadership. And there are so many other things I can touch on. But what sparked the idea for my capstone, in addition to my own lived experiences, were the conversations I had prior to joining CSP with folks who were interested in incorporating JEDI, as I call it, but they were paralyzed about where to start, or they knew they can start by hiring a consultant, but because of this typically high cost, the JEDI, or Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, fell lower on their priority list. So my long-term vision to begin to address this challenge is a 3-phase solutions path. Phase 1 is to create a JEDI toolkit for internal integration of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is more HR focused, so hiring, retention, how to create a welcoming community within the organization itself for their employees. Phase 2 will then expand this toolkit to include external facing programmatic work, such as research, advocacy, stakeholder engagement. And phase 3 will make this, and which is the ultimate goal, is to make this toolkit open source and accessible and user-friendly. And at this point, I'm currently focused on phase 1, which is the internal JEDI integration, because the majority of folks that I've spoken to who are working on this issue within conservation are focused on fixing themselves first internally before they move on to their programmatic work. A useful exercise that we learned during the CSP program was the lean design methodology. And as part of this protocol is to reach out to as many stakeholders who are engaged in this issue to see what the challenges or pain points actually are. Because I can think I know what the problem is, but the stakeholders are the best people to tell you what their actual challenges are. So there's still so much I need to learn when it comes to the integration of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's why I'm super excited to be working with Green 2.0 over the summer. So as one of their 4 national fellows. So Green 2.0 is an organization committed to holding environmental organizations accountable to their promises of increased diversity, while advocating for those who feel they're not heard, and sharing the research publicly through their annual report system on the demographics of these organizations. And they are often cited as one of the most popular organizations to do this work. So I'm super excited and I look forward to learning more from this team and help them with this mission. Finally, I wanted to share this sort of intense looking graph chart, not to scare you, but to show you the complexity of what I'm working on. And it's not even that fleshed out yet. And I've focused more on the internal justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion integration, which is the blue side on the left. And I am currently in active discussions with 2 potential partners for my capstone work after the summer. One is a major foundation that is interested in designing a JEDI process for some of its grantees. Another is a major conservation NGO. And this chart shows the many points for intervention when it comes to this work. But the starting point for me is that the organization must first recognize the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I will admit, when I first came into the program, I was sort of naive thinking, well, of course, everyone thinks this is important, especially following the events that happened last summer. But as I spoke to individuals who were working on this issue, they shared that they had pushback from their leadership saying, well, we're not political, or, we just focus on the science. And so this made me realize not everyone is going to be on board. So for who I want to partner with, given that I have a short time to get this work done, I want someone who's at least recognizing that this is an issue and they're committed to focusing on this. So I'm super excited to speak with you today, and feel free to connect with me. And now I have the pleasure of passing it on to Rafid, who is an inspiration, and I know you're going to enjoy what he has to say.
Thank you very much, Kalina, for the kind introductions, and Anne. Hi, everyone. I'm calling from Alor Island here in Indonesia. So I'm gonna share you about my work here. So I'm a second year student at the UCSC Coastal Science and Policy program. And my work focuses on the conservations of pelagic treasure sharks, or Alopias pelagicus, in Alor Island, Indonesia. So before coming to CSP, I worked for about 3 years in an organization called Manta Trust, where I'm focused on finding the alternative livelihood solutions for the local communities who are depending on endangered manta ray species, and they are depending on them as livelihoods and protein sources. And I had a background in marine biology and more towards on the biological sides. And I just realized that I need to learn more about the complexity of conservations that I witnessed on the ground, more on the aspects of social policies and also the economy. That's partly why I decided to pursue on studies on CSP, because I think that it has a very cool curriculum with a cool faculty, and also it gives you the chance to actually work on the practical issues on the second year instead of doing the pure research. So before I begin my presentations, I would like to acknowledge the donors that have funded my work so far for my capstone, from Ocean Blue Tree, Shark Conservation Fund, and Macrim Impact Philanthropies, and also Conservation International. So Indonesia is one of the largest shark fishing nation in the world, and it is one of the most biodiverse region with people, different indigenous tribes and also local communities with different kind of economic level. And most of the communities, especially in the coastal communities, are small-scale fishermen. And in terms of sharks conservation issues, Indonesia has challenges in managing its shark resources because shark is one of the most economically viable livelihoods for the local communities that help feed the families and also put food on the table. For pelagic treasure shark, it is one of the endangered species that is classified by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And the reason why it's become endangered, it's because in Indonesian fishing fleets, for example, it made up 50% of the composition of bycatch in large industrial tuna and targeted in many small and coastal populations. For over 10 years, since early 2000, the decline of pelagic treasure shark have seen by more than 80% of population decline. And they're one of the most commonly caught shark species in Indonesian shark fisheries. However, with this kind of status and urgency to protect the pelagic treasure shark, it is one of the most understudied animals because of the pelagic behavior, elusive nature, and also it's really complicated to manage such species. And the research efforts and also conservation efforts has been very minimum so far. That's actually the reason that I co-founded my organization called the Treasure Shark Indonesia, that was inspired, and right now it's an established NGO because of CSP, because I realized that the capstone project that I'm working on is one of the important things that I would like to continue after my graduations from the UCSC. And the project that I'm focused on is in Alor Island, Indonesia. So if you see the map here, it's a small island located in the East Nusa Tenggara province, in the southern part of the Coral Triangle region, one of the most biodiverse marine region in the world. In the East Nusa Tenggara province, representing about 27.69% of 30% of the overall marine protected areas in Indonesia. However, even if it represented a third of the total marine protected area in Indonesia, it is one of the most productive shark fisheries where management is still very minimum and still very poorly documented. In Alor Island in particular, endangered treasure sharks are present. And based on our recent research, where this fisheries previously was unknown to the government institutions and organizations and NGOs, majority of the sharks catches here are pregnant. So in 1 year, the local communities could land up to more than 300 pregnant individuals, which really worrying and put the urgency of protecting the animals where the conservation has not been initiated. From that 300 pregnant females, there are actually only 20 treasure shark fishermen. It's a very small scale communities, shark fishing communities, and therefore I believe that doing conservation interventions to this local community, stopping the fishery, would immediately protect treasure sharks locally. And I realized that these sharks play an important livelihood sources for the local communities. And I would like to explore what kind of potential solutions that could be proposed to make the shark fishermen transitions into different kind of livelihoods. And here in Alor, it's one of the MPA that has been also established since 2015, and it's also a growing tourism industry that can potentially incentivize conservations. And when we successfully intervene the small fishing communities and transition them into different kind of livelihoods, I think that it could be a model communities for intervention, especially in Indonesia, where many small local communities, depending on shark species, have lack of options to transitions into better livelihood alternatives and supporting the shark conservation nationally here in Indonesia. And the thing that I do in my capstone project is that I do a combinations of interdisciplinary approaches. The first one is that I'm using the satellite and acoustic uh, technologies to find out the movement of the treasure sharks within the marine protected area to find the critical habitat. Given that there are facts of many pregnant females caught throughout the year in Alor, we would like to know whether there are nursery habitats or important habitats such as cleaning stations that could be supporting the tourism activities in Alor. And the second one is that I do the interviews and also discussions with the resorts and also local dive centers operating in Alor and trying to find out whether or not they would like to support the shark fishing communities to transitions and involving them in the tourism activities in the future as a way to providing them better jobs and economic alternatives. And also we're working together with the local fishing communities, the shark fishing communities, to explore other economic alternatives that could reduce their dependency of shark fishing. Here, because tourism is not the only silver bullet to providing these fishermen communities, because they have different age ranges, some of them old, some of them young, and they have different preferences of what kind of alternative livelihoods they would like to do, to reduce their dependency on shark fishing. And the findings that we have so far is that from our studies, we concluded there are at least three critical habitats of treasure sharks where the sharks spend at least an hour every day throughout the course of 1 month, where they are go checking and visiting the receiver's place where we put underwater. And this could be an indications of potential critical habitats for them. And we could propose this idea to the local government to enhance the site-based protections, while simultaneously we work with local communities to stop the shark fisheries in the area. And the second one is that the tourism operators actually willing to contribute to providing alternative livelihoods through direct employment. So the idea that they have is to actually provide jobs such as being a boat driver or become the dive masters or dive guides to to help running their business in the future. However, with COVID, it's right now being one of the challenging situations for the tourism industries. So we also explore other ideas from the local shark fishermen themselves, and it turns out that several fishermen actually wanting to transition to small scale online tuna fisheries, but they needed additional skills and facilities, because right now treasure sharks and tuna are two species that the fishermen catch in the daily life, but the fishermen do not have the skills and facilities to actually make the tuna to be one of the high value products. So we would like to provide them and assist them in that process. And the other way, the older fishermen, those who already intended to reduce their time to go out for fishing, they would like to start the land-based business, such as the chicken coop or curry repair shop. But right now they also need capital because they don't have the financial capacity to actually start that one. And those are the solutions that the fisherman has been proposing to us. And the next step that we would like to do, this is going to be beyond my capstone work after I graduate from UCSC, is that provide skills and facilities for shark fishermen who are willing to shift to small scale sustainable handline fisheries such as boat and market access, and also advocate with the local governments to give capital for fishermen who wanted to start land-based business. So through my organizations and through my learning process in CSP, I realized that even in the first year, we've already been encouraged and to think about the long-term plan for our work beyond the graduations. For example, learn how to fundraise, learn how to network and find the people who might be interested in our work, and then actually try to pitch to them to get the supports. And we're very glad that throughout my time with CSP, we have fundraised several financial supports from many different donors that enabled us to continue the work with Treasure Shark Indonesia. So with that, I think I'm very kindly hoping that you could support our work through our social media accounts and also in the fundraising effort to make this small-scale shark fisherman transition into different alternative livelihood solutions. And with that, I would like to introduce the next speaker, who is Casey, who's also my inspirations and a good friend while I'm doing my master's in UCSC.
You're on mute, Casey. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, let me get my presentation up here for you guys.
And while she's getting up, I'll just remind everybody that Casey is in our first cohort of alums. So she's in her first year after graduating.
All right. Hello, everyone, and good evening. I am Casey Zweig, and I currently serve as the head of technology deployment for Full Cycle, which is a sustainable biotech company here in Silicon Valley. I'm based in San Jose, and I lead our commercialization efforts for our technology, which turns organic waste into bioplastic through a natural process that I will tell you more about in order to create a replacement for traditional petroleum-based plastics. And as was mentioned, I'm an alumna of the UCSC Coastal Science and Policy Program, part of the first cohort that graduated just at the start of the pandemic in 2020. And my capstone project was titled Innovating Beyond Plastic, the story of becoming a bacteria farmer and material alchemist to save the planet. And you'll see through my work that my capstone project and work with the Coastal Science and Policy Program directly led into my career with Full Cycle right now. And I can truly say that joining the CSP program was the best decision I could have ever made for my career, and is what landed me my dream job in a role that I'm just thrilled to be part of, where I can pursue both my professional passion as well as this greater mission to end plastic pollution and combat climate change. So with that, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story on my background and just how I got to this place, because it was quite a departure from some of the prior work that I was doing. And the CSP program kind of served as this springboard to allow me to grow into this entirely different role with a different skill set and different expertise than I was using previously. So before joining CSP in Santa Cruz, I lived and worked in Malibu, California, another coastal city in Southern California. And my role there was leading their environmental programs. And being a coastal city, most of that work was focused on their coastline, on pollution prevention and keeping this coastline beautiful for both the community and its visitors and wildlife to enjoy. And so, of course, just given the state of plastic pollution these days, it's quite pervasive. So this was one of the issues for the local community, that after a storm, there would be a lot of plastic and debris on the beach. And being a more ocean-minded community, there was a lot of support to be more proactive in addressing this kind of waste. And so I dug in as a representative, a public servant of this community, to figure out how to stop pollution on our beaches. And as I learned more—
Casey, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing your slides.
Oh, okay.
I tried to tell you that earlier, but it didn't get through. Sorry.
Oh, weird. Okay. Thank you.
You might have forgotten to share.
Yeah. Let me get this up for you. All right. How about now?
Yes.
We can see it.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
And we will, you didn't miss much though, just a few photos that we will skip through right now. Here we go. All right, here are the photos of Malibu, beautiful coastline, and just some of the typical debris that we would see on the beaches after a storm. And as I was digging into these local issues to work on, pollution prevention in my own backyard on the home front, it became abundantly clear that this was a much larger issue, that plastic pollution, single-use plastics were really plaguing the planet globally, and much, much worse in areas outside of Malibu. And so with this information, I first started with, well, what can we do here in Malibu? What will be impactful, both locally and serve as a model to others? And so I began to both research the problem, potential solutions, and write policies that did ban single-use plastics in a number of kind of the most problematic applications. So Malibu was an early adopter in these plastic policy bans and was the first to really target straws, stirs, and cutlery. And we saw these kinds of policies really take off. And there was a ton of interest from other communities, both locally in our region, as well as nationally and internationally, kind of carrying this approach forward for their communities as well. Then through the implementation of these policies that we passed, I was working with businesses, working with nonprofits, working with communities, doing education and outreach to ensure that the policies were actually followed and having the impact that it was intended to have. And through this work, I was really able to start thinking about the root cause of why we had all this plastic pollution to begin with. And I had to begin to question, were these policies enough? Like, could this actually turn the tide on plastic pollution? Was my solution and my work in my local community, even with the ripple effect that it had, going to provide a solution at the scale of the problem I was trying to address? And this is where I did start to have some doubts. You know, banning straws felt like a huge victory. And yet I didn't know that it could really combat what I was seeing globally. And so with that, I wanted to look towards more system level solutions. And it became evident that in looking at materials like plastic, we had to address this idea of a linear economy, or sometimes you'll hear people say, you know, our take, make, waste society. And it was the disjointed nature of our linear economy coupled with broken waste infrastructure systems that were completely failing us, where recycling systems, compost systems, even just general trash collection systems were not performing in the way it was intended. And instead, we're just extracting all these resources and allowing it to litter the planet, or not using these materials in kind of the best way possible. And when you start to dig into that, you realize there is an alternative, but it's an entirely different system than what we're currently operating now. And that looks like this, like the circular economy, where we can have regenerative materials, where we can keep products and materials in use and really design out waste and pollution from the get-go so that we're not creating these problems in the beginning. And so with this lens, I set my sights on the Coastal Science and Policy program, thinking I want to do something even more impactful than what I'm doing now. And I need to figure out how to get there. And it was similar to Kalina. It was the only program I applied for. It was the only program that I felt was really trying to grow leaders wanting to kind of take action and apply the work that they were doing. And so in my time with the Coastal Science and Policy program, understanding these systems, opportunities for change, I came across this organization in the Bay Area called Full Cycle Bioplastics. And I have to say, I was blown away by their technology. And Full Cycle's technology is circular economy, does create a circular material. And the power in this solution is that it addresses 3 global issues with one elegant material. So it addresses plastic pollution, food waste, and climate change by transforming organic waste, like food waste, into PHA, which is this biodegradable alternative to plastic. And it's made from naturally occurring bacteria. And so that is why I became a bacteria farmer. And I joined Full Cycle's team at a time when they were building a pilot scale facility in Mountain View for Google, taking food waste from Google's kitchen and using that as the feedstock to then make this substitute to plastic that could then be used in Google's kitchens on some of their foodware. And so I took an entirely new position, much more operations oriented, with some engineering, a lot of biochem, and just kind of dove into this site to get it up and running, commissioned, and producing PHA. And it was quite a wild ride. This was my capstone project to bring this site online, to validate the technology, and to build a team to run this site. And along the way, I had to learn every process, all the ins and outs of the technology, lots of project management skills, an incredible amount of just troubleshooting, resilience, adaptability. There are days when I was like knee deep in food waste, days when I'm running analytics, days when I'm meeting with executives and other investors in our technology to talk to what we do. And I just love the diversity of experience in this role and really feeling empowered by the support from the CSP program to know that even though I hadn't done this work before, I was up for the challenge and that I could do it, and that I was supported by my advisors, my professors, my classmates, in addition to advisors at Full Cycle. This slide just shows kind of a myriad of different tasks that I would do on site. On the left, I'm working at one of our reactors at the pump skid there. There's a very mechanical and technical component to the work, as well as running analytics in a lab environment, and ultimately getting to make materials to show that this could work. And this experience for my capstone really set me up as an asset to Full Cycle as a company, as they're on this pretty steep growth trajectory as well, in their work towards commercialization. And so by bringing online the largest deployment of their technology to date at Google, that gave me the skill set to know kind of what we would need to do next to bring this to full commercialization, to our first commercial scale facility. And so that's where I am now. Full Cycle has sold its first commercial license. We've brought on so many more staff. And so now I oversee both our production and scale up teams at Full Cycle as we drive towards building out our first few commercial facilities, and continue production at the Google facility, and some other sites that we're bringing online. And all of this is to enable an alternative so that we don't have to use petroleum-based plastic, so that we can have circular materials that truly biodegrade, truly compost. And the beauty of PHA is that it can be collected alongside any other organic waste stream. So it can go in the green bin with other food waste, with other landscaping waste. And if it's delivered and collected, back to a plant like ours that's making PHA, it can continue to be remade into new PHA without any degradation, over and over again, unlike plastic that we have now. And if it does end up, in a landfill, in a compost facility, or even in the environment, it's going to break down. It's made from naturally occurring bacteria, and so it will break down in any natural environment. And with that, I continue to employ lessons and thinking and strategy that we learned as part of the CSP program. And I lean into my network from my fellow cohort and professors and the cohorts to come after us on a regular basis. I think that the key takeaways that continue to inform my work with Full Cycle are really around leadership and thinking. Being able to lead a team of people in a very challenging, dynamic environment is completely necessary to succeed in the startup world, especially when you're trying to scale new technology. And a lot of the challenges that you experience in that environment are similar to some of these like wicked problems that we're dealing with when we talk about environmental issues. They're complex, they're dynamic, they require both adaptability and resilience. And I think that those two qualities, adaptability and resilience, especially over carrying through this work over the last year in a pandemic, have just proven time and time again to be incredibly valuable to the work. The other piece is just this idea of systems thinking and realizing that we need to think as whole systems and not just the sum of their parts, and identify what pieces and what links within that system we can have the greatest impact and focus our energy there in our work. It's something that I bring into my work at Full Cycle every day. There's always more that we want to do than we have the ability to do. And while we're pushing ourselves to grow and do as much as possible, we have to constantly evaluate, where can we have impact? How do we get closer to our mission? The urgency to our work isn't just the success of our business. The urgency is in our mission and in the problems that we're trying to solve. So if we truly want to make a difference when it comes to climate change, there is a ticking clock. So being able to work on these complex problems and break it out into actionable pieces and identify those leverage points is something that I learned from CSP. And I'm really glad that there's a program out there that's taking that approach to these big environmental issues, because that's the only way we're going to truly make progress. And I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions. And I will stop sharing and pass it on back to Anne.
Thank you. I'm just going to briefly share one more slide for a moment. I think all three of you just were fantastic, really inspirational. And Casey, thank you so much for ending with that message about two key lessons being leadership and thinking, especially systems thinking. I couldn't agree with you more. And I just want to mention to our audience, if you're at all interested in supporting this kind of work, please talk to us, help us plant the seed for growing this global community of practice in the Coastal Science and Policy Program. We're partway through our third year. There's a lot more that we can do. We actually practice even what we preach to our students, in that we've told our students that they are co-creating this program with us, and we continually review and get anonymous as well as in-person conversational feedback on things that we could do better, what's working, what's not working, so that we continue to remain agile and creative in making this program as best as it can be for addressing these really enormous needs in the world. And I hope you can see how exciting and rewarding it is to be knitting together this amazing global network of really talented, inspiring young rising leaders from all over. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And I think, Don, I'll turn it over to you. You're going to manage questions from what I understand.
Yeah, thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for the great presentation. So I'm probably going to go backwards. So we'll start with who we ended with, and then we'll kind of move our way back up. So I have a question from Julie for Casey. With the introduction of Senate Bill 1383 in California, what other technologies are you aware of that can do something good with food waste, and how much of that waste can Full Cycle's technology handle?
So there really isn't a limit to the waste that Full Cycle's technology can handle. That's really part of the beauty in it, is that our technology in particular can take mixed organic waste rather than, say, single stream. And so anything that is made up of carbon, which is any organic material, can be broken down to those two simple carbon chains. And that's essentially what we're using as our feedstock. And so we would like to take a lot of the organics. We think that we can provide a higher value to that life cycle than, say, traditional compost. And our technology is quite complementary to compost systems as well, where you could have a bioplastic system co-located next to existing infrastructure that's collecting food waste. So I think that Full Cycle's technology very much supports California's food waste diversion goals and climate goals, and hope to see more of this built out in California over the next few years.
Thanks, Casey. And I have a couple more questions, and we'll move on to some other panelists here. But from Rick, maybe kind of somewhat related to that last question, is there any work being done to convert old plastic? Because I think your work is related to food waste. Is there anything that's being done to convert old plastic into something that can lead to something other than a destination in the landfill?
Yeah, there still are recycling facilities and application for plastic. There is degradation that happens to the material quality when you do recycle plastic for the most part. There also just aren't very strong markets for recycled plastic right now, which is another reason that a lot of it doesn't get recycled and remade into products. But there are companies out there that are looking for ways to say, turning old water bottles into clothing products and other applications like that.
Great. And Casey, another question coming your way. People are interested in waste, of course. In your work, how much of a deterrent is vested interests like the plastics industry versus economic competition? So, would these alternatives to plastics take off if only the economics worked, or what else would be needed to kind of make things take off? Like, what are the impediments to this really scaling, I guess?
Yeah, right now there's huge market demand for PHA specifically from really big brands. You guys would recognize the majority of companies on our client list right now that are signed up to do product development with our materials. Right now, it's really a race to commercialization. And so we actually see it more as co-opetition rather than competition with other PHA producers. We think that getting more PHA into the marketplace is a victory across the board. And so there's a ton of market opportunity. And because we're using waste streams, which is kind of like a negative value feedstock, and we're doing this on systems that resemble wastewater technology rather than traditional kind of biotechnology, which is more expensive, the economics do work out that we can be cost competitive with petroleum-based plastics.
Right. Okay, I have a question for Rafid. So how do you think your engagement in Allure could be scaled to address these challenges beyond the Allure region and maybe beyond, throughout Indonesia or even beyond?
Right on. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. I'm wondering how you think that your engagement in Allure, the work you're doing in Allure, can be scaled to address similar kinds of challenges beyond Allure throughout Indonesia or maybe even beyond there.
Yeah, I think that the studies of our tracking technology using the satellite tags will help to provide the movement nationally in Indonesia, and once we know where the treasure sharks are heading to, and then we can sort of like identify which are the external threats exist outside of Allure. So for example, the first line fisheries or long line fisheries operating around the movement areas, and then trying what kind of approach that we could do to reduce the risk of bycatch and other targeted fisheries that threatening the treasure sharks outside Allure.
Great. Another question for you, Rafid, is, and I think it's kind of talking about the thing you mentioned about the pregnant treasure sharks. Assuming those pregnant sharks give birth in your study area, have you thought about tracking the young sharks to see where they go? And is that maybe a different place in the adult sharks, and that might be in some need of protection?
Yeah, most of the pregnant sharks that caught by the local fishermen, so when they gutted the pregnant sharks, the babies mostly already more dead, and that might be one of the approaches I would like to try, but I haven't really think about tracking the baby sharks right now. But what we think is to actually specifically targeting the pregnant females and put the internal acoustic tags. And we're actually planning to put one receiver within the bay of Alor, which we thought would be the potential nursery habitats, and see if the pregnant sharks really do come into the bay and give birth. So that's one way we're gonna approach to answer these questions of potential birthing grounds for the treasures.
Great, thanks, Rafid. And then a question for Kalina. You mentioned in your talk the need for increasing the awareness for the need for the Jedi within conservation organizations. And there's a question wondering about how important is it to also increase the diversity of potential employees. So in other words, there's hiring, but then there's also, is there the increasing the diversity of potential employees? Is that a problem, or do you see that there's plenty of diversity in the potential job candidates? That's for you, Kalina. I don't know if you're there. Maybe you're muted.
Oh,
There you are.
Kalina's having trouble with her sound right
Having
now.
trouble with my sound, yeah.
There
I
you
can't
are.
hear you,
Okay.
but I see it in the captions.
We can hear you, Kalina, if you want to
Okay.
speak. Yeah.
Well, let me restate the question for you, because I'm not sure if you're seeing the question I asked you, to make sure you're asking the question that I just asked. So can you hear me right now, Kalina? Yes or no? Thumbs up? No? No? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we, for right now, Kalina, you work on your sound issues. Let me skip to a question for Anne real quick.
Also, I think she can read the question, so she maybe could just answer a question that she's read.
Yeah, but I don't know a way to tell her which
Anne-
question, whichever questions that she needs to answer.
Sure. Okay.
So Anne, for you, there was a question about the environmental impact and compatibility of this microalgae species on common aquaculture environments and native species. Has that been conducted? I think the question is around, is there a potential problem with introducing this algae in broader environments, and any impact or changes on native microbiome, plants, fishes,
Right.
things like that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And it's in fact one of the main motivations that led our team to decide to go after a grant, and we were fortunate to win it, to develop this aquafeed decision support tool. We're going to be in that tool essentially bringing together both the best methods and then also assembling the known literature and figuring out where are the gaps and where do we know are the information, so that people can use a common approach across all different possible users and all different possible producers, common approach to assess what are the environmental impacts on biodiversity, which I think is a lot of that question, impacts on water quality, water quantity, impacts on global warming potential, et cetera, as well as doing an economic analysis. So, another way of answering the question is there's not a lot of data out there on what these impacts would be. And there's variation in how believable the information is, because only some of the information is published in scientific journals where you have this sort of impartial, independent peer review to make sure that the study's been done well and that you can kind of feel like the results are reliable. Some of the work is instead talked about on blogs or on websites of companies, but they don't always divulge their methods or share really the raw data that lead them to their conclusions. So that's part of why I was saying the whole area of innovation for alternative ingredients, including algae, is a bit of a wild west right now. One thing, though, that is positive at this point is in the work that our lab is doing, we do not need to use any genetically engineered microalgae. We're just using naturally existing strains, and they're being produced on land in very contained systems. Of course, there still can be ways that things can escape, but by at least not using genetically engineered, we're removing one whole set of concerns. And my position has been that there's no need to use genetic engineering because their nature has already produced an amazing diversity of traits in naturally occurring microalgae. But that is a good question. That's why we're doing that work.
And I think you kind of answered this, Anne, but just a quick question earlier on from somebody was, so this microalgae, you're harvesting it from the wild, or you're growing it in tanks?
Now, harvesting from the wild would be completely impractical. It would require so much energy. You know, microalgae, as the word micro suggests, they're microscopic. They're free floating in the water. You would have to filter so much water to harvest enough. You'd essentially have to repeat what nature has evolved with all these organisms, right? That, you know, small shrimp eat the algae, and then smaller fish eat that, and bigger fish eat that. So instead, they're grown on land in containers. And one of the species that we work with, the Sizacrytrium for replacing the oil, is already being produced on a large scale on a number of different countries. It's really already commercially scaled, although I could scale more. And it is a species that's versatile enough that even though it's an algae, it doesn't really always need sun to grow. It can literally be grown also by a fermentation process in vats. So it's grown in very indoor, easily contained systems. The Nanochoropsis, which is the one that we're using for replacing the fish meal, and again, we use the waste leftover biomass after the oil's been extracted, that is being grown in ponds usually, although it could also be in tanks. The company we work with has some land in Southwest Texas, an area that is fairly arid soils. There's no other agriculture there that it's competing with. And there's a naturally existing shallow aquifer that's partly saline. So it's just perfect conditions for growing the algae. But there is a question of, you know, how much land would you need to use, and you don't want to have to displace agricultural lands. Luckily, one of the great attributes of algae is you don't need the kind of rich soils that you need for agriculture, and you can recycle the water. And also by raising marine species, we're using saline water rather than fresh water. So we can avoid a lot of competition for land for agriculture, but we still have to be thoughtful and careful about where to site these operations. And from the industry's perspective, they're looking for cost-effective places also to site them. So there's a lot of questions that still have to be addressed. Some of those questions can actually also be addressed with the decision support tool we're developing, or that tool could be expanded over time. Our vision is for that tool to be completely open access. And we just, in fact, recently won another grant from the USDA that's going to allow us, through a kind of outreach process, to build a community of practice with stakeholders from industry, from conservation organizations, and from government, to actually get a community of people who would continue to build out the tool and be able to add elements that could address some of these questions.
So thanks a lot, Anne. And looks like Kalina's back online, right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Question earlier for Kalina was around, you're doing this great work focusing on trying to create the awareness and the need, or create the awareness within the environmental sector for diversity in their employees. How big of a problem do you see it as far as the pool of potential employees in the applicant pool? Is there a problem with diversity there? And if so, what do you see as the potential solution for that?
I don't think it's the applicant pool. I think there's the common thing that happens, like an organization say, oh, we put the job description out there, but no one has applied. And the challenge is, when it comes to JEDI work, is that you have to be intentional and go where the people are, whether it be go to HBCU campuses or, you know, go to different networks, because the history of environmental groups, conservation groups, is that if you stick within your own network, you're going to have similar people. So you have to be very intentional about reaching out and going outside your own networks. So that's one way. Another way is to, you know, create pathways. For example, the Ray Fellowship program in which I was in was very intentional for young persons, because it was a fully paid internship. A lot of opportunities, internships are unpaid within the environmental field, and that in turn limits people who do not have the opportunity to just take unpaid work, and that tends to be those from lower incomes, more diverse groups. And so then they don't have that kind of built up CV or resume to get into higher positions. So by creating pathways that, you know, are fully paid, that, you know, reach out to different networks, you can help them build their backgrounds. Because if I was in the Ray Fellowship, I probably wouldn't be here with you today. And I know there's another question about where do I see the biggest opportunities for addressing Jedi and conservation? On the internal side, within an organization itself, it's definitely elevating diverse people to positions of power. So an organization could say, yes, we're diverse, but they tend to be at lower level positions, whether it be admin positions, and they don't have the power to make institutional changes. Also, you also find that the employees, the diverse, the underrepresented employees, they tend to be doing a lot of the DEI work on a volunteer basis. And so you want them to be in these leadership positions to make change within the organization. And then on the external front, for example, if you're working with other stakeholders, you want to provide opportunities to uplift voices of those who are already doing the work, those grassroots organizations who don't have their voices heard typically, and use your platform to elevate the work they're doing and share their stories and their lived experiences, which is super important.
Great, and then you got a couple more questions here, Kalina, so stay tuned here. Are you aware of some programs that serve conservation science educated Indigenous peoples to assist in job placement, hopefully in their native environments? So, kind of Indigenous community focused work.
I am not aware for Indigenous specific groups, but I can look into that and look into that for you. But the Ray Fellowship is a great one to look into.
Okay,
that's a good question.
Yeah, and then sorry, there's another question for you. I'm just trying to find it again. Hang on a second. So this person in the audience is curious about how you can share this Jedi knowledge toolkit that you're developing with others, like those of us that are trying to engage, and how are you going to make this available? Just working with individual NGOs, or are you going to make it, how are you going to get it out
and
there?
so that's where I am right now. The ultimate goal is to make it accessible, but right now I'm learning what would go into it, and that's what my capstone is about. We'll be working with an actual organization as a case study and to see what actually works, because this is not my background. This is just something I'm passionate about, and so the capstone is me learning more about this work. And so ultimately, I hope that this becomes something that's open source, because like another person mentioned, it's an issue across sectors. I just chose this sector because this is where my interests lie, but a lot of things can be transferred across the sector. Like I'm on the DEI committee for my division right now. And so we're looking at it from a academic institutional side, and I see a lot of the similar themes and a lot of similar challenges. And so hopefully when whatever comes out of my capstone, I can make it available to folks and share it. But there are a lot of great organizations that already are doing this work, like the Green Lining Institute, Race Forward, that they've developed toolkits of their own that a person can use, and it's publicly available.
Great, thanks, Kalina. One more question for Anne. What's your opinion on using non-ocean derived fish food for conservation hatcheries? Is this a viable solution for helping the fitness of hatchery fish, particularly salmonids, for release in the wild to boost natural populations? So, I guess the value of your potential fish feed for conservation purposes for supplementing salmonid populations in particular.
Well, our diet should work if we develop a fish-free feed, or even one that just has greatly reduced the fish ingredients for rainbow trout, for example. It doesn't really matter if those fish are living in a hatchery or in a commercial fish farm. Their biological nutritional needs are the same. And in fact, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has already expressed some interest in working with us to do some trials using the algae-based feed. Those kinds of feeds, and if you were to also include some insect meal, which is one thing that we're open to doing, is maybe mixtures, you would actually end up with feeds that are a little bit closer to what the trout eat in the wild. So we have a California Sea Grant that Dr. Sarker leads, and the USDA grant that we just got that he also leads, both of them will allow us to start working with stakeholders like that. So it definitely has potential and probably would be closer to what young fish eat in the wild than what they're being fed right now in these conservation hatcheries.
Thanks so much, Anne, and thanks all of our other panelists. Appreciate it. Just to let people know that if you do still have some burning question you want to get answered, you can connect with the CSP program, and we'll make sure that whoever your question is for will get the question and get it directed towards them. And so with that, thanks so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to George.
Thank you, Anne and Don, and thanks to all our presenters. Please join us for our next Kraw lecture, April 22nd, The Past, Present, and Future of DNA-Based Forensics with Professor Ed Green. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. It was great.